So if you clicked on this video, that means you're interested in some antique firearms. Well, let me go over a few that actually can fit pretty well into your budget. What we're going to be looking at will be antique firearms according to United States law, which means it will be anything made before 1899. The general price range that you can find most of these in the United States is going to be anywhere from about $750 up to a bit over $1,000, up to $1,200. I've got one on here that will go a little bit north of that. Prices I'm looking at is generally what you're going to find if you were to go out on something like Gunbroker and look for them. I'm going to stick with antique rifles on this because I've not ever looked at any antique handguns, and I really don't have any information about those. One thing that I want to make clear on this here, I'm not talking about buying these as an investment, because it's going to be very difficult to figure out what firearms are going to have their value down the line and what that value is going to be on them. There seem to be certain ones at certain times that are very popular. Right now, the Old West guns are very popular. You're also starting to see a lot of stuff from like the Civil War has kind of started to drop down a little bit in price, although a lot of that is pretty rough at this point because those are pretty old. I'm also going to go over a bit about ammunition for them and how practical all of these would be to actually shoot. And as far as wanting to shoot these antique rifles, a lot of these still can be, but you do need to have a competent gunsmith look it over and make sure that everything is good on it, because what you don't want to have happen is have pieces of 120 plus year old rifle all over you. And of course, if you just want to get for a wall hanger, then that's not as big of a concern. And actually, there's a number of things that can happen to any of these that can make these look really cosmetically fine but not be safe to fire, and that will often drop the price down on those a lot. I'm going to start off with the first antique rifle that I ever bought, the Trapdoor Springfield. Now these can actually be found pretty easily around here. There were a bunch of them made, and for the most part the Trapdoor was pretty well built, actually maybe even a little bit overbuilt. So they tend to hold up really well, so there's still a lot of them around there. And because there were a lot of other firearms from the era that were a lot more popular, particularly Winchesters and Colts, with those prices just soaring up on those, that hasn't happened so much with the Trapdoor. Now, Trapdoor is just a basic single-shot rifle. It was originally a conversion of a percussion cap musket. Aside from the early conversions that were in 50-70, you find Springfield Trapdoors in 45-70. Now, you do need to make sure that you get the right type of 45-70 for this. They were designed for black powder, which is going to be very different than the smokeless that we have nowadays. It'd really be best to put black powder rounds through them. There's a few places making them, but you can also reload them yourself. And as is true with a lot of these antique rifles, you don't want to do copper jacketed bullets on there because that will end up causing a lot more erosion on the barrel. These barrels are already old and already gone through a lot. Also, the metallurgy back then wasn't as good as it is nowadays, so you really just don't want to stress those things and tear them up. Another rifle that can be found pretty easy is going to be another single shot, and that's going to be the Martini-Henry. Now, the Martini-Henry came out of Britain. It fires the 5.77-450 cartridge, which is basically something that would be 5.77 caliber neck down to a 45. It has quite a bit of punch to it. It's a very heavy cartridge. While not really being a lever action as we know them to be, it does have a lever that controls it on there, that bringing down the lever will eject out the spent cartridge. That's similar to the trap door. Then you can load in the new round and close it up. It doesn't have a hammer on it there. It's more striker fired, or kind of a proto striker fired. One big downside on the Martini-Henry is going to be that 577-450 cartridge. Now that is a pretty much extinct cartridge now as far as anybody making it. You can find some rounds out there, you can find the brass, and since it is a center fire, you can reload it, but you're either going to have to pay a lot for the rounds that you put through it, or you're going to have to get into reloading and make those yourself. Martini-Henrys aren't quite as common in the United States as some of these others, so you have to look around a little bit more to find them, but they're out there and not really horribly difficult to find. Another single shot that's very popular just because of how important it was is the rolling block. Now the rolling block was developed by Remington, and while Remington did make a bunch of them for a bunch of different countries, they also had manufacturers in other countries making them. So there are a lot of different rolling blocks out there from different places. The rolling block has the hammer that pulls back, and then the thing that it's named after, the rolling block, which has just a piece on it that you pull back. You can then put the cartridge in there, close it, and then the hammer can go forward. The hammer closes up on that block really well, and altogether that's a very tight held together action. The cartridge doesn't automatically eject out like it does with the trapdoor and the Martini-Henry, but it is a very strong action. Now, since the rolling block was made for a bunch of different places, it is in a bunch of different cartridges. You'll find some 50, 70 examples around in the United States that were at various National Guard units. You have a whole spackling of different South American countries that used it. In 43 Spanish, you had it available in 43 Egyptian over there. There's just a number of different cartridges to look at. You need to really pay attention on these when you're looking at one, and look at what the cartridge is and try to see if that's a cartridge that's really being used anymore. Most of the cartridges that it was found in, like 43 Egyptian and 43 Spanish, are once again very much like the 577-450, just not made anymore. You're not going to find that ammo just sitting around somewhere. Now this next one is the one that's often very much overlooked in the United States because we really don't pay attention to firearms from this country, although there is a particular YouTuber nicknamed Gun Jesus who is doing his best to let the world know about these. That's going to be a number of French rifles. You can often find Lebels and Berthiers out there that really don't get a whole lot of attention because, once again, people just aren't paying attention to French rifles over here. One nice thing with those was that the Lebel, being the first firearm to come out with smokeless powder, it can use modern smokeless rounds in it as long as you're not using rounds that are way over pressured. The same with the Berthier. So you can get those. You can use the 8mm Lebel cartridge in it. That's very easy to find. Once again, these are a little bit more difficult to find, but they're just not really paid attention to a whole lot over here. So you can find one and get a pretty good deal on it because there's just not a lot of demand for them, and that's not bringing the price up like it does on a number of these. Another group to think about is going to be firearms that were developed there in the late 1800s that stayed into production for a while. If you can find some of those early ones that were made there, those will squeak into being antiques, and often you can find them to be not much different in price than the ones that were made 10 or 20 years later and aren't antiques. One group to look at would be a whole wide range of Mausers. There's a bunch of those out there in various different cartridges. Now you got to pay attention to what cartridge it has in it, because those Mausers were just made for a bunch of different countries and by a bunch of different countries and just all over, and there's just calibers all over the place that these are in, so you need to pay attention to those, but you can find them in there. This is also going to be true of the U.S. Krag Jorgensen. You can often find some of those that are actually antiques, and they'll be around the same price as the regular Krags. And the last one I'm going to go into here, this one you'll have to do a little bit of looking around to find one that'll go into it, and these are going to push up closer to that $1,500 end of the price range there potentially, and that's going to be a number of different models of Winchester lever action rifles. Now these are going to be really popular right now, and that's why it's going to be hard to find them affordably, but you can do it, and depending on which model you want to go with, it can make them easier or more difficult to find. You can generally find Model 92s and Model 94s pretty inexpensively there. These were kept in production by Winchester for quite a long time, and that made them a lot easier to just ended up flooding the market with a bunch of them, and so the antique ones didn't pick up quite as much of value to them. And that would be one way to get them a little bit more affordably. These also tend to come up and sell a lot more. The Model 92 and 3030 is probably going to be the most common used Winchester lever action that you will see anywhere, whether that be an antique or ones that were made later. But you've also got some of the other ones, the Model 73s, 76s, and 86s. Those are going to be a bit more pricey, just being that earlier iteration and that Winchester stopped making them. That kind of brought the value up on those. Now, particularly if you're looking at a Model 73, there are a lot of these that were made in various rimfire cartridges. And outside of 22 long rifle and 22 short, all of these rimfire cartridges have pretty much gone by the wayside, and there's nobody making those, and you can't reload rimfire on your own. So if you find one of those that's in a rimfire cartridge, it's pretty much just done, and you're not going to find anything. There's not going to be any way to shoot those. So those are pretty much going to be wall hangers. It's also going to be true of the 1866 and the original Henry, that those are all in 44 Henry rimfire. There's also a number of different cartridges that you can find the 73s in, just kind of all over the place there. 4440 being the one that's most associated with it. The 73s that are in 4440 tend to be more expensive now than the ones in the other calibers, like 3840 or 3230. Then the 76 was also made in a number of different cartridges, including 4570, which they managed to somehow get into that lever action. But one thing with the 73s and 76s that you need to really be careful about is that toggle link action that they had in there. And while this is a really interesting and amazing way to make everything work, you've probably never thought about what's going on inside of the lever action. You probably never envisioned exactly how it works, but you probably didn't actually imagine what is going on in there with that toggle link. Unfortunately, that toggle link can only be so strong that once it gets put into that position, there's only so much that it can take, and the only way to make it stronger is to scale it up. And to get into really powerful cartridges, you have to scale it up to a point that it is not practical to have the rifle. And also, just looking at the metallurgy at the time, once again not being what it is nowadays, these things just really can't take modern rounds. So you need to make sure that you're running black powder rounds through these. Now, You can find these in black powder. You can also load black powder yourself, but it is something to think about, that you're not just grabbing regular smokeless 4440 and running through one of these antiques there. And so that's a number of antique rifles that are actually quite affordable if you're wanting to put one of those into your collection. Is there one that I left out? Well, let me know about it by leaving a comment down in the comments section. You can like this video if you thought it was great. You can also subscribe to my channel if you want to make sure that you catch all the videos that I post. And you can click the little bell notification to make sure you get notifications of everything so you don't miss any of the videos that I post. I'm Jeremy with Poindexter G, and we'll see you next time.